For 25 years, my husband locked himself in our attic for 3 hours every single week. I never questioned it. I trusted him completely. But the day I finally climbed those stairs and saw what he'd been hiding, my entire world shattered into pieces I didn't know could ever be put back together. Hello, my dear friends. My name is Margaret, though most people call me Maggie. I'm 71 years old now, and I'm sitting here in my small cottage in Portland, Oregon, finally ready to share a story I've carried like a stone in my chest for far too long. This isn't easy for me. Even now, my hands shake a little as I prepare to tell you everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But I've learned that some stories need to be told, not just for the person who lived them, but for anyone out there who might be living through something similar right now. I was born in 1954 in a small farming town outside of Eugene. My parents were simple people, hardworking, the kind who believed that honesty and dedication could get you through anything life threw at you. I was their only daughter, sandwiched between two brothers, and I grew up believing that marriage was forever, that when you made a promise to someone, you kept it no matter what. That belief shaped every decision I would make for the next 50 years. I met Thomas when I was 19 years old. It was the summer of 1973, and I was working at my uncle's diner in downtown Portland, saving money for community college. Thomas came in one Thursday afternoon, tall and lean with sandy brown hair that fell across his forehead in a way that made him look younger than his 23 years. He ordered coffee and apple pie, and when I brought it to his table, he looked up at me with these warm hazel eyes and said thank you in a voice so genuine it caught me off guard. He came back the next day, and the day after that. Always ordered the same thing, always sat at the same booth by the window, always had a book with him. I noticed he read everything: novels, biographies, poetry, technical manuals. On the 5th day, he finally introduced himself properly. "I'm Thomas," he said, extending his hand across the counter. "Thomas Bennett. I've been trying to work up the courage to ask your name for 4 days now." "I'm Margaret," I replied, feeling my cheeks warm. "Margaret Sullivan. But everyone calls me Maggie." "Well, Maggie," he said with a smile that made my heart do something strange in my chest. "Would you maybe want to get dinner with me sometime? Somewhere that isn't your workplace, where you're not the one serving." That was how it started. Simple. Sweet. Uncomplicated. Thomas was an engineer, freshly graduated from Portland State University, working for a manufacturing company that made industrial parts. He wasn't flashy or particularly romantic in the traditional sense, but he was steady, reliable. He showed up when he said he would. He listened when I talked. He had this quiet intelligence about him, always thinking, always analyzing, always trying to figure out how things worked. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. It wasn't a grand gesture, no ring hidden in champagne or surprise party with all our friends. We were sitting on a bench in Waterfront Park, watching the Willamette River flow past, and he just turned to me and said, "I want to spend my life with you, Maggie. Will you marry me?" I said yes without hesitation. We married in April of 1976 at a small church ceremony with maybe 40 people present. My mother cried through the entire service. My father shook Thomas's hand so hard I thought he might break it, and whispered something in his ear that made Thomas nod solemnly. Years later, Thomas told me what my father had said. "You take care of my girl, or you answer to me." And Thomas did take care of me, at least in all the ways I could see back then. We moved into a modest 2-story house in the Selwood neighborhood, a fixer-upper that Thomas said had good bones. The house was built in 1952, with hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places, a kitchen with yellow tile that was hopelessly outdated even then, and an attic accessible only by a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling. Thomas was excited about that attic. He said it would be perfect for storage, maybe eventually a workspace. Those first years of marriage were everything I'd hoped they would be. Thomas worked long hours at the manufacturing plant, often coming home with grease under his fingernails and exhaustion in his eyes, but he never complained. I found work as a secretary at a law firm downtown, typing letters and filing documents and answering phones. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was steady income, and together we managed to make our little house into a home. We painted the walls together on weekends, argued good-naturedly about whether the living room should be pale blue or soft green. Settled on cream because we couldn't agree. We planted tomatoes and basil in the backyard, though neither of us really knew what we were doing and most of the plants died that first summer. We adopted a tabby cat from the shelter and named her Juniper. And she became the child we didn't have yet, the practice run, we joked. I wanted children. Desperately. I'd always imagined myself as a mother, pictured a house full of noise and laughter and chaos. Thomas wanted them too. Or at least he said he did. We'll wait a few years, he'd say whenever I brought it up. Let's get ourselves established first. Make sure we're financially stable. That seemed reasonable to me. Responsible. So I agreed to wait. It was in our third year of marriage, 1979, when the attic ritual began. I remember the exact day because it was the first Saturday in March, unseasonably warm, and I'd planned to spend the afternoon working in our garden. Thomas had been distracted all morning, checking his watch repeatedly, barely touching the breakfast I'd made. When I asked if something was wrong, he shook his head quickly. Actually, Maggie, I need to tell you something, he said, setting down his coffee mug. I've been thinking about starting a project. A personal project, something that's just mine. I encouraged him immediately. That sounds wonderful, I said. What kind of project? He hesitated, looking almost embarrassed. I want to build model ships. I know it sounds silly, but I've always been fascinated by maritime engineering, and I think working with my hands on something creative, not just industrial parts, would be good for me. Help me decompress. There was nothing strange about that request. Nothing alarming. Many men had hobbies, workshops, spaces they retreated to. My own father had spent hours in his garage restoring an old Chevrolet. I think that's a great idea, I told Thomas. Where were you thinking of setting up? The attic, he said. It's the only space in the house that's really unused. I could insulate it, put in some better lighting, make it comfortable. Of course, I said. Do whatever you need. That weekend, Thomas transformed. He hauled supplies up that narrow ladder, insulation panels, work lights, a sturdy table he'd built himself in the garage. He installed a lock on the attic door, a simple deadbolt, and when I asked about it, he explained that he'd be using some sharp tools and small parts, and he didn't want me accidentally getting hurt if I went up there looking for something. That made perfect sense. I didn't question it. The pattern established itself quickly. Every Saturday afternoon, like clockwork, Thomas would excuse himself after lunch, pull down the attic ladder, climb up, and lock the door behind him. 3 hours later, he'd emerge, sometimes with sawdust in his hair, sometimes smelling faintly of wood stain or varnish. He'd be relaxed, centered, more present than he'd been all week. How's the ship coming along? I'd ask. Good, he'd reply. Slow but good. These things take time. Months passed. Then years. The Saturday routine never wavered. 3 hours every single week, locked in that attic. I grew so accustomed to it that I planned my own activities around his schedule. Saturdays became my time to visit my mother, go shopping with friends, work in the garden, read a book uninterrupted. I never once asked to see what he was working on. That space was his, and I respected that. Marriage, I believed, required giving each other room to breathe, to have separate interests, to maintain some small piece of individual identity within the larger partnership. Friends sometimes asked about it. Your husband locks himself in the attic every week? Isn't that strange? No, I'd say. He's building model ships. It's his hobby. Everyone needs a hobby. And I believed that completely. In 1982, we finally started trying for children. I was 28, Thomas was 32, and we both felt ready. But month after month, nothing happened. At first I wasn't worried. These things take time, everyone said. Just relax, stop thinking about it so much. After 2 years of trying, we sought medical help. The doctors ran tests, lots of tests, uncomfortable procedures that left me feeling exposed and inadequate. The results came back inconclusive. Nothing obviously wrong with either of us, but nothing obviously right either. Unexplained infertility, they called it. One of those frustrating diagnoses that offers no answers, no solutions, just a shrug and a suggestion to keep trying. Those were dark years for me. Every pregnancy announcement from friends felt like a knife. Every baby shower invitation was a reminder of what I didn't have. I'd lie awake at night listening to Thomas breathe beside me, wondering if he blamed me, if he regretted marrying someone who couldn't give him children. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But Thomas never made me feel that way. He held me when I cried. He came to every doctor's appointment. He researched options, asked questions, explored possibilities. We talked about adoption, about fostering, about the many different ways people build families. We'll figure it out, he'd say. We have time. His Saturday attic sessions became even more important during those difficult years. He needs that escape, I told myself. 3 hours a week to not think about our struggles. To lose himself in something creative and controllable. I was glad he had it. By 1987, we'd accepted that biological children might not be in our future. We were in the process of applying to adopt when my mother became ill. Cancer, aggressive and unforgiving. She lasted 6 months from diagnosis to death, and those months consumed everything. The adoption process stalled. My grief was overwhelming. I took a leave of absence from work to care for her in her final weeks, and Thomas supported me through all of it. Even during that terrible time, he never missed a Saturday in the attic. I barely noticed. I was too submerged and lost to pay attention to much of anything else. After my mother died, something shifted in me. I threw myself back into work with an intensity that surprised everyone, including myself. I took on extra projects at the law firm, stayed late, volunteered for assignments no one else wanted. Grief has to go somewhere, and mine went into productivity. Thomas seemed relieved that I was coping, that I wasn't falling apart. He encouraged my work ethic, praised my dedication. And every Saturday, like always, he disappeared into the attic for exactly 3 hours. The years blurred together. We settled into our routines. Thomas advanced at his company, eventually becoming a senior engineer. I became the office manager at the law firm, supervising 5 secretaries and handling increasingly complex administrative tasks. We took modest vacations, usually camping trips to the coast or the mountains. We maintained friendships with other couples, hosted occasional dinner parties, attended weddings and funerals and anniversary celebrations. We looked from the outside like a stable, content, slightly boring middle-aged couple. No children, but plenty of hobbies and interests. No drama, no obvious problems. But there were small things looking back that I ignored or explained away. Thomas was always vague about his model ships. When friends or family asked to see them, he'd deflect. They're not ready yet, he'd say. I'm a perfectionist. I don't like showing unfinished work. After 20 years of Saturdays, that excuse was wearing thin, but I defended him. He's particular about his art, I'd explain. You have to respect that. There was also the matter of supplies. Thomas brought materials into the house regularly, always when I was out or distracted. Boxes and bags that went straight up to the attic. I assumed they contained wood, tools, paints, the things one would need for model shipbuilding. But I never actually saw the contents. Once, maybe 10 years into the Saturday ritual, I casually mentioned that I'd like to learn about his hobby, maybe even help with some of the detail work. The look that crossed Thomas's face was so strange I almost commented on it. Something between panic and anger. Gone so quickly I convinced myself I'd imagined it. That's really sweet, Maggie, he said carefully. But this is something I need to do alone. It's therapeutic for me, you know? Having one thing that's completely my own. I understood that. Or I thought I did. So I never brought it up again. There were financial things too, small discrepancies I noticed but didn't pursue. Thomas handled most of our money, paid the bills, managed our savings. I trusted him completely. But sometimes I'd see charges on our credit card statement that didn't quite make sense. Purchases from craft stores, yes, but also from places that seemed unrelated to model building. Electronics stores. Photography equipment suppliers. Once, a charge from a medical supply company that Thomas explained as a special magnifying lamp he needed for detail work. I accepted all of it without question because questioning would have implied doubt, and I didn't doubt Thomas. He was my husband. My partner. The man I'd chosen to spend my life with. In 2004, we celebrated our 28th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home. We'd long since stopped making big plans for these occasions. Thomas cooked salmon. I made a salad. We opened a decent bottle of wine. We sat across from each other at our dining room table, the same table we'd bought secondhand when we first married, and talked about our week, our plans for the garden, a trip to visit Thomas's brother in Seattle. It was pleasant, comfortable, safe. That night, as I lay in bed waiting for sleep, I realized I couldn't remember the last time Thomas had really looked at me. I mean truly looked, with focus and attention and presence. We coexisted. We were polite. We functioned well as roommates managing a shared household. But when had we stopped being lovers? When had the passion faded into routine? I pushed the thought away. This is what long marriages look like, I told myself. The intensity of youth gives way to the stability of partnership. That's normal. That's healthy. I fell asleep believing that. The turning point came in the spring of 2005. I was 51 years old. Thomas was 55. We'd been married 29 years. My younger brother Daniel, who lived in Seattle with his wife and 3 children, called me on a Tuesday evening. His voice was tight with worry. "Maggie, I need to tell you something, and you're probably going to be upset with me," he said. My stomach dropped. "What's wrong? Is someone hurt?" "No, nothing like that. It's about Thomas." I gripped the phone tighter. "What about Thomas?" Daniel hesitated, and in that pause I could feel the weight of whatever he was about to say. "I saw him last Saturday. In Seattle." "That's impossible," I said immediately. Thomas was home last Saturday. He was in the attic, working on his ships like always. "Maggie, I saw him. Downtown near Pike Place Market. He was with someone." The world tilted slightly. "With who?" "A woman. Younger, maybe 30s or early 40s. They were having coffee at a cafe, and they looked," he paused, searching for the right word, "familiar. Comfortable with each other." I felt cold suddenly, despite the warmth of the spring evening. "You're mistaken," I said. "It must have been someone who looked like Thomas. I know my own brother-in-law, Maggie. I didn't approach them because I wasn't sure what was going on, and I didn't want to make assumptions. But I think you should know." After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring at nothing. There had to be an explanation. A work trip Thomas hadn't mentioned. A colleague who happened to be in Seattle. A completely innocent encounter that looked suspicious to Daniel's eyes. When Thomas came home from work that evening, I decided to ask directly. "Daniel called," I said casually, not looking up from the vegetables I was chopping for dinner. "He said he thought he saw you in Seattle last Saturday." Thomas didn't miss a beat. "Seattle? No, I was here. Working in the attic like always." "That's what I told him," I said, watching his face carefully. "He must have seen someone who looked like you." "Must have," Thomas agreed, his expression unchanged. He was either telling the truth or he was an extraordinarily good liar. I wanted to believe the former. I needed to believe it. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Over the next few weeks, I found myself paying closer attention, watching Thomas more carefully, listening to his explanations with new ears. He still went to the attic every Saturday for exactly 3 hours. His routine never varied. But now I noticed things I'd overlooked before. The way he always showered immediately after coming down from the attic. Even though building model ships shouldn't make someone particularly dirty. The way he kept his cell phone with him constantly, even taking it to the bathroom. The way he'd sometimes smile at his phone screen, a small private smile, before quickly putting it away when he noticed me watching. Small things. Probably meaningless things. But they accumulated in my mind like drops of water filling a bucket. One Saturday in June, about 2 months after Daniel's phone call, I did something I'd never done before. I paid attention to the sounds from the attic. I stood in the hallway below, perfectly still, and listened. I expected to hear the sounds of work, sawing, sanding, the scrape of tools on wood. Instead, I heard Thomas's voice, muffled but distinct. He was talking to someone. My heart began to pound. He must be on the phone, I reasoned. Making a call to a friend or family member. But why would he need to lock himself in the attic to make a phone call? I pressed my ear closer to the ceiling, trying to make out words, but the insulation was too thick. Just the low murmur of his voice, rising and falling in what sounded like conversation. Then silence. Then his voice again. He was definitely talking to someone. When he came down that afternoon, I asked casually, "Were you on the phone up there?" Thomas paused, just for a fraction of a second. "Yeah, I called Jim to ask about a technique he uses for rigging." "Why?" Jim was Thomas's oldest friend from college, someone he talked to regularly. It was a reasonable explanation. "Just wondered," I said. "Thought I heard you talking." He smiled and kissed my forehead. "You're hearing things, old girl. Must be the house settling." Old girl. He'd started calling me that in recent years, and I'd never liked it. It made me feel dismissed, reduced to something comfortable and past its prime. That night, I lay awake long after Thomas had fallen asleep beside me. 29 years of marriage. 26 years of Saturday afternoons locked in an attic I'd never once entered. 26 years of trusting without verifying. The reasonable part of my brain said I was being paranoid. Thomas had never given me real cause to doubt him. He was home every night. He was present, attentive enough, consistent. He didn't exhibit the classic signs of infidelity, no mysterious charges on credit cards beyond the hobby supplies, no unexplained absences, no sudden changes in appearance or behavior. But the other part of my brain, the part that had been awakened by Daniel's phone call, whispered questions I couldn't silence. What if those weren't hobby supplies? What if those 3 hours weren't spent building model ships? What if everything I believed about my marriage was built on a foundation of lies I'd been too trusting to see? I decided I needed proof, one way or another. Not suspicions or overheard fragments of conversation, but actual evidence that would either confirm my fears or put them to rest forever. The following Saturday, I told Thomas the first was driving to Salem to visit an old friend from the law firm who'd recently moved there. I'd be gone most of the afternoon, I said. "Don't wait up for me." He seemed pleased, even relieved. "That sounds nice," he said. "You should do that more often, see your friends." I left the house at 11, drove around the block, parked 3 streets over, and walked back. I let myself in through the back door as quietly as possible. The attic ladder was down, the door above closed and presumably locked. I stood in the hallway, my heart hammering so hard I was sure he'd hear it, and I listened. For the first 30 minutes, I heard nothing unusual. Some movement, the creak of floorboards, sounds that could easily be someone working on a project. Then I heard it. A woman's voice, clear and distinct, coming from the attic. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Affectionate. Intimate. Familiar. Thomas's voice responded, equally warm. They were having a conversation. A real, sustained conversation. My legs nearly gave out. I grabbed the wall to steady myself, fighting the urge to scream, to cry, to pull down that ladder and confront whatever was happening up there. But I didn't. Some instinct told me I needed to be smarter about this. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with before I acted. I left the house as silently as I'd entered, drove to a coffee shop across town, and sat there shaking for 2 hours before returning home at the time I'd said I would. Thomas greeted me warmly. "How was Sally?" he asked. "She's good," I lied, the words tasting like ash. "We had a nice visit." That night, I couldn't eat dinner. I claimed a headache and went to bed early, lying in the dark trying to process what I'd heard. There was a woman in our attic. Or at least a woman's voice, which meant either Thomas had somehow brought someone into our house without my knowledge, or he was video chatting with someone. Or there was some other explanation I couldn't fathom. 29 years. Almost 3 decades of marriage. And I didn't know the first thing about what my husband did for 3 hours every Saturday. The betrayal felt like drowning. Over the next week, I moved through our house like a ghost, functioning on autopilot. I went to work, came home, made dinner, had surface-level conversations with Thomas about weather and news and household repairs. All the while, my mind churned with plans and questions and fears. I couldn't confront him yet. I needed more information. I needed to understand what was happening before I decided how to respond. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I started investigating my own husband. I went through his phone bill when it arrived, scanning for frequently called numbers I didn't recognize. I found 3. When I searched them online, they came back to residential addresses, 2 in Seattle, 1 in Portland. No names attached that I could find. I checked our credit card statements more carefully, looking for patterns. The charges I'd previously dismissed as hobby-related took on new significance. Regular purchases from electronics stores. Monthly subscriptions to services I didn't recognize. Payments to something called cloud storage solutions that I'd never heard Thomas mention. I created a secret email account and started documenting everything. Dates, times, charges, phone numbers. Building a case like a detective, gathering evidence of a crime I still hoped wasn't being committed. But the deepest truth, the one I could barely admit even to myself, was this. I was terrified of what I'd find if I kept looking. Because if Thomas had been lying to me for 26 years, if those Saturday afternoons had been covering something other than an innocent hobby, then who was he? Who had I been married to all this time? And who was I, if I'd been so blind, so trusting, so foolish as to never question, never doubt, never push past the locked door to see what my husband was hiding? The answer to that question was waiting for me in the attic. I just didn't know it yet. The hardest part about discovering betrayal isn't the moment of revelation itself. It's all the days that come before, when you're living in that strange liminal space between suspicion and certainty, when every conversation with your spouse becomes a performance, and every smile feels like a lie you're telling yourself. I became someone I didn't recognize during those weeks of investigation. I'd wake up beside Thomas each morning, watch him brush his teeth and tie his tie and kiss my cheek before heading to work. And I'd think about the woman's voice I'd heard coming from our attic. I'd wonder who she was, what she looked like, how long this had been going on, whether Thomas thought about her when he looked at me. The not knowing was excruciating. I continued my detective work methodically, carefully. I couldn't afford to make mistakes or reveal my hand too early. I needed the complete picture before I confronted whatever truth was waiting for me. The phone numbers I'd found on our bills led me to conduct what felt like absurd surveillance. I drove past the Portland address one evening after work, a modest apartment complex in the Hawthorne district. I sat in my car across the street for 30 minutes, watching people come and go, wondering if one of them was connected to Thomas, if one of them knew things about my husband that I didn't. It felt pathetic sitting there like some character in a bad television drama. I was 51 years old, a respected office manager, a woman who'd always prided herself on dignity and composure. And here I was stalking strangers based on phone numbers. But I couldn't stop. The need to know consumed everything else. I started keeping a detailed log. Every Saturday, I'd note the exact time Thomas went up to the attic and when he came down. 3 hours, always 3 hours, never varying by more than 10 minutes. That consistency suggested routine, habit, something scheduled rather than spontaneous. I documented his behavior after emerging from the attic. He always seemed lighter, more relaxed, more present. Sometimes he'd be almost chatty, telling me about his day during the week, asking about mine, suggesting we watch a movie together that evening. Other times he'd be quieter, contemplative, but never upset or agitated. Whatever was happening up there, it was something he enjoyed, something that fulfilled him in ways our marriage apparently didn't. That realization hurt more than I expected. 3 weeks after I'd overheard the woman's voice, I made a decision. I needed to see inside that attic. Not while Thomas was up there. That confrontation would come later, but when the house was empty, when I could explore without interruption or discovery. Thomas had a dental appointment scheduled for a Tuesday morning. He'd taken a half day off work for it, planning to go straight from the dentist to the office. That would give me at least 3 hours alone in the house. Time enough to figure out how to get past that locked door. The night before, I barely slept. I rehearsed what I'd do, how I'd explain myself if Thomas came home unexpectedly, what I'd say if I found evidence of an affair. My mind spun through scenarios, each one worse than the last. Thomas noticed my restlessness. "You okay?" he asked, his hand on my shoulder in the dark bedroom. "You've been tossing and turning for an hour." "Just can't settle my mind," I said, which wasn't a lie. "Work stress." He made a sympathetic sound and rolled over, asleep within minutes. I lay there listening to his breathing, wondering how he could sleep so peacefully when our entire marriage might be built on deception. Tuesday morning arrived with gray skies and the promise of rain. Thomas left for his appointment at 8:30, reminding me he wouldn't be home until evening. I watched his car disappear down our street. then immediately went to the hall closet where we kept tools and household supplies. The lock on the attic door was substantial but not sophisticated. A simple deadbolt, the kind meant to keep people out but not designed for serious security. I'd watched enough home improvement shows to know that most interior locks could be defeated with basic tools if you knew what you were doing. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was determined to learn. I started with a screwdriver, trying to remove the entire lock mechanism. The screws were old and painted over, difficult to turn. My hands shook as I worked, making the task even harder. After 20 minutes of struggling, I managed to remove 2 screws, but the third was stripped, the head damaged from years of paint buildup. I sat on the floor beneath the attic entrance, frustrated and close to tears. There had to be another way. Then I remembered something my father had taught me when I was young. Most locks can be picked if you're patient enough. He'd shown me once how to open a locked door in our old house using nothing but a bobby pin and a screwdriver, laughing as he explained that locks were more about discouraging casual intruders than preventing determined entry. I found bobby pins in the bathroom, 2 of them, and brought them back to the hallway. I pulled down the attic ladder and climbed up until my face was level with the lock. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I'd watched a few YouTube videos over the past weeks, preparing for this moment. The theory seemed simple enough. Use one pin to apply tension to the lock cylinder. Use the other to manipulate the pins inside until they aligned. In practice, it was far more difficult. My first attempts were clumsy, the bobby pins slipping, my hands cramping from the awkward angle. But I kept trying, adjusting my technique, listening for the subtle clicks that the videos had described. 45 minutes passed. My arms ached from holding them above my head. Sweat dripped down my back despite the cool morning air. Then miraculously, I felt something shift. The lock turned with a soft click that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet house. The attic door was open. I sat on the ladder for a long moment, suddenly terrified to continue. Once I climbed through that door, there would be no going back. Whatever I found would change everything. Maybe I didn't want to know. Maybe ignorance really was bliss. But I'd come too far to stop now. I pushed the door open and pulled myself up into the attic. The space was nothing like I'd imagined. I'd pictured a dusty, cramped area filled with storage boxes and cobwebs, maybe a small workbench with model ship supplies scattered around. Instead, I found a fully finished room, insulated and drywalled, with soft carpet on the floor and professional lighting installed in the ceiling. One entire wall was covered with built-in shelves, but they didn't hold model ships. They held photograph albums, dozens of them, arranged chronologically with dates written on the spines. The earliest date I could see was 1979, the year Thomas had started his Saturday ritual. My hands trembled as I pulled down the first album and opened it. The photographs inside made no sense at first. They were pictures of a little girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old, with dark curly hair and Thomas's hazel eyes. She was playing in a park, blowing out birthday candles, opening Christmas presents, riding a bicycle with training wheels. I didn't recognize her. I'd never seen her before in my life. But Thomas was in many of the photos with her, pushing her on a swing, helping her build a sandcastle, carrying her on his shoulders. In every image he looked happy, genuinely joyful in a way I rarely saw at home. I turned the pages with growing horror and confusion. Who was this child? Why did Thomas have hundreds of photographs of her? What was I looking at? The second album showed the same girl, slightly older now, maybe 7 or 8. More birthday parties. A school play where she wore a fairy costume. A trip to the beach. Always Thomas was there, documenting her life with the dedication of a devoted parent. The third album. The fourth. The fifth. The girl growing up page by page, year by year. 9 years old. 10. 12. Adolescence arriving with braces and awkward smiles. Thomas beside her through it all. His arm around her shoulders, his expression proud and loving. I couldn't breathe. The attic felt too small, too hot, despite the cool morning. I set down the album I was holding and looked around the room more carefully. There was a desk in one corner, neat and organized. On it sat a computer, fairly new, and next to it a sophisticated camera with several lenses. A filing cabinet stood against another wall, its drawers labeled by year. I opened the top drawer of the cabinet, and found folders full of documents, school reports, medical records, vaccination certificates, all bearing the name Emma Christine Harlow, born March 15, 1975, the year before Thomas and I were married. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. This girl, this Emma, had been born before our wedding. The timeline meant that Thomas had known about her, had been involved in her life, from the very beginning of our marriage. While I was walking down the aisle in my simple white dress, making vows about forsaking all others, Thomas had already had a daughter he'd hidden from me for 29 years. I sat down in the desk chair because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. The betrayal was so massive, so complete, that I couldn't fully grasp its dimensions. This wasn't an affair. This was an entire secret life, a parallel existence that had been running alongside our marriage since the day we said I do. All those Saturdays. 3 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, for 29 years. That was over 4,000 hours Thomas had spent documenting this child's life, while I remained completely oblivious downstairs. I opened the computer. It wasn't password protected, which seemed almost arrogant in its carelessness. Or maybe Thomas had never imagined I'd get this far, that I'd pick the lock and invade his private space. The desktop was organized into folders. Emma school years, Emma birthdays, Emma achievements, Emma and Dad. Each folder contained hundreds, sometimes thousands, of digital photographs. I clicked on the most recent folder, dated 2005. The girl, no longer a girl but a young woman now, looked back at me from the screen. She was 30 years old, beautiful in an understated way, with Thomas's eyes and smile. The photos showed her graduation from somewhere, wearing academic regalia, holding a diploma. Thomas was beside her, looking more proud than I'd ever seen him. There were photos of her apartment, a modern space in what looked like downtown Seattle. Photos of her at work in what appeared to be an architecture firm, sitting at a drafting table. Photos of her with friends at restaurants, at concerts, living a full adult life. And threaded through all of it, Thomas, her father, present and involved and clearly adored. I found a folder labeled video calls, and my stomach turned. When I opened it, I saw software for video conferencing, a program I recognized from my office. The call history showed weekly sessions, every Saturday afternoon at 1 o'clock, each lasting approximately 3 hours. This was what I'd heard. Not a woman having an affair with my husband, but his daughter. His secret daughter, talking to him through a computer screen every single week for years. I don't know how long I sat there, clicking through folders, looking at photographs, trying to understand. Time lost meaning. The gray morning light coming through the attic's small window shifted and changed as hours passed. Eventually I found a folder simply labeled Sarah. When I opened it, I found photographs from the late 70s and early 80s. A young woman, blonde and pretty, holding a baby. The same woman pregnant, Thomas's hand on her swollen belly. The woman in a hospital bed, exhausted but smiling, newborn Emma in her arms. Sarah, Emma's mother. The woman Thomas had been with before me, or maybe during the early days of our relationship. The timeline was still unclear. In a subfolder I found scanned letters, handwritten on yellowed paper. I opened the first one, dated May 1975. Thomas, I can't do this anymore. I know you want to be involved, and I appreciate that, but Emma and I need stability. Your situation is too complicated. You're getting married soon to someone who doesn't know about us, and I can't be part of that deception. It's not fair to anyone, especially not to Emma. I think it's best if you step back. Let us build our own life without you. Sarah. The next letter, dated July 1975, was longer and more emotional. Thomas had apparently convinced her to let him remain in Emma's life, promised he would support them financially, be present however he could. Sarah had agreed reluctantly, with conditions. He could visit, but only when scheduled. He could send money, but only through a specific arrangement. And most importantly, his wife, meaning me, could never know. I will not be the other woman in this scenario, Sarah had written. I will not have my daughter grow up feeling like a secret or a shame. If you want to be her father, you'll have to find a way to do it honorably, within whatever constraints your marriage requires. But I will not lie for you, and I will not have Emma lie either. She deserves better than that. More letters followed, documenting the arrangement they'd worked out. Thomas would visit Seattle once a month, spending Saturday afternoons with Emma. As she grew older and technology advanced, those visits became video calls instead, easier to manage with his work schedule, and less suspicious to the wife he was deceiving. The letters from Sarah stopped in 1998. I found an obituary in the folder, neatly printed and saved. Sarah Harlow, age 46, passed away after a brief illness. Survived by her daughter Emma Christine Harlow. After Sarah's death, the correspondence shifted. Now the letters were from Emma, writing to her father. They were affectionate, grateful, full of details about her life. She called him Dad. She thanked him for the money he sent for college, for his advice about her career, for being there every Saturday without fail. In one letter from 2003, Emma wrote about how much she valued their relationship despite its unusual nature. I know it's complicated with your wife, she'd written. I know you've had to keep me separate from that part of your life. It hurt when I was younger, feeling like a secret. But I understand now that you were trying to protect everyone, that you were doing the best you could in an impossible situation. I'm grateful for every Saturday we've had, every call, every moment you've chosen to be my dad, even when it would have been easier to walk away. I closed the letter and pressed my hands against my eyes, trying to stop the tears that were coming. This wasn't the simple betrayal I'd imagined. It wasn't an affair I could rage against, a mistress I could blame. It was infinitely more complex and painful. Thomas had a daughter. He'd been a father for 3 decades to a child I knew nothing about. He'd built an entire relationship, provided financial support, offered guidance and love and presence, all while maintaining the fiction of our childless marriage. All those years I'd grieved our infertility, cried over negative pregnancy tests, endured painful medical procedures, explored adoption options. He'd already been a father. He'd known what it felt like to hold his newborn child, to watch her take her first steps, to help with homework and attend school plays and give advice about college and careers. He'd had everything I desperately wanted, and he'd kept it from me. The cruelty of that realization was breathtaking. But even as anger rose in my chest, hot and righteous, another part of me struggled with the complexity of what I'd discovered. Thomas had been supporting his daughter financially for decades. Where had that money come from? We shared bank accounts, managed our finances together. How had he been sending significant amounts to Emma without me noticing? I went back to the filing cabinet and pulled out folders from the bottom drawer, the ones labeled financial records. What I found there added another layer of deception to the already towering structure of lies. Thomas had a second bank account I'd never known about. The statements went back to 1976, the year after Emma was born. Regular deposits, always in cash, ranging from a few hundred to several $1,000s. Regular withdrawals, monthly, going to an account in Emma's name. The money wasn't from his salary. I would have noticed those kinds of withdrawals from our joint account. This was something else. I found invoices in another folder, receipts for freelance engineering work Thomas had been doing for years. Weekend consulting, side projects, small jobs for companies that needed expertise he could provide. Work he'd never mentioned to me, income he'd never declared on our joint tax returns. He'd been running a secret business, funneling that money into a secret account, supporting his secret daughter with the proceeds. The organization it must have required, the careful record-keeping, the constant vigilance needed to maintain such an elaborate deception. It was staggering. How many times had I balanced our checkbook, reviewed our finances, planned our budget, completely unaware that Thomas had an entire parallel financial life? How many times had he sat across from me at the kitchen table, helping me calculate expenses and savings, knowing he was hiding thousands of dollars in an account I didn't know existed? The man I'd been married to for 29 years was a complete stranger. I heard a sound from downstairs, the creak of a door, and my entire body went cold. I checked my watch and panic seized me. It was 4:30 in the afternoon. I'd been in the attic for over 7 hours. Thomas was home. I moved as quietly as possible, desperately trying to put everything back exactly as I'd found it. The albums returned to their shelves in the right order. The computer folders closed. The filing cabinet drawers shut. My hands shook so badly I could barely manage it. I heard Thomas's footsteps downstairs, heard him call my name. Maggie. You home? I didn't answer. I couldn't. My voice would have given everything away. I climbed down the ladder as silently as possible, pulled it up behind me, closed the attic door, and realized with horror that I had no way to relock it from the outside. The bobby pins were still up in the attic, and even if I had them, I couldn't pick a lock to engage it, only to open it. Thomas would know someone had been up there. He'd know I'd discovered his secret. Maybe that was fine. Maybe it was time for all of this to come out into the light. I heard his footsteps coming up the stairs. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. I stood in the hallway directly beneath the attic entrance and waited. He appeared at the top of the stairs and stopped when he saw me. His expression shifted through several emotions in quick succession: confusion, concern, then recognition as his eyes moved from my face to the attic door above me. He knew. He could see it in my posture, in the way I was looking at him, in the tear stains I could feel tight on my cheeks. Maggie, he said quietly. His face had gone pale. I found my voice, though it came out rough and broken. Who is Emma? He closed his eyes, and in that moment I saw 30 years of careful control collapse. His shoulders sagged. His carefully maintained mask of the devoted husband crumbled. When he opened his eyes again, they were full of something I'd rarely seen from Thomas. Fear. Let me explain, he said. I laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. Explain what, Thomas? Explain that you've had a daughter for 30 years and never told me? Explain that you've been living a double life since before we were even married? Explain that while I was crying every month over negative pregnancy tests, you already had a child? He flinched with each question as if they were physical blows. It's not that simple. Then make it simple for me. I moved toward him, and he actually took a step back. Tell me the simple version where you're not a liar who's been deceiving me for 3 decades. Emma's mother and I were together briefly before I met you, he started, but I cut him off. Don't. I held up my hand. I read the letters, Thomas. I saw the dates. Emma was born in March 1975. We started dating in the summer of 1973. You were with Sarah while you were with me. His silence was confirmation enough. Did you love her? I asked. Sarah? He hesitated too long before answering. It was complicated. Did you love her? I repeated, my voice rising. Yes, he said finally. In a different way than I loved you, but yes. The admission shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. I already knew about Emma, about the decades of deception. But hearing him say he'd loved someone else, someone he'd kept secret all these years, felt like a fresh wound. Why didn't you tell me? My voice broke on the question. Before we got married, when you found out she was pregnant, why didn't you tell me? Because I was a coward, he said simply. Because I wanted both. I wanted Sarah and Emma, but I also wanted you. I thought I could manage it, keep everyone happy, maintain both relationships without anyone getting hurt. How did that work out? The bitterness in my voice was corrosive. Worse than I could have imagined. He ran his hands through his graying hair. A gesture of frustration I'd seen 1,000 times over the years. Sarah figured it out eventually, that I'd married you. She was furious, almost cut me out of Emma's life completely. It took years to rebuild that trust, to prove I could be a reliable father even if I was a terrible partner. And me? What about my trust? I know. His voice was barely above a whisper. I know I destroyed that. We stood in the hallway, feet apart but miles distant, the weight of his betrayal filling the space between us. I had so many questions, so much I needed to understand, but I was too exhausted, too emotionally ravaged to continue. I'm leaving, I said. I'm going to stay with my brother for a while. I need time to think, to process this, to figure out what happens next. Maggie, please. Thomas reached toward me, but I stepped back, unable to bear the thought of him touching me. Let me explain everything. There's more you need to know. More? I almost laughed. What more could there possibly be, Thomas? What other secrets are you hiding? Another family somewhere? Other children I don't know about? His expression told me my sarcasm had hit closer to home than I'd intended, and for a moment I thought I might actually be sick. There aren't other children, he said quickly, but there are things about why I made these choices, about what I was trying to protect, that you should understand. I don't want to understand right now. I pushed past him, heading toward our bedroom to pack a bag. I want to not look at you. I want to not think about how every moment of our marriage has been built on lies. I threw clothes into an overnight bag without caring what I grabbed. Thomas stood in the doorway watching me, his face a portrait of misery that I took no satisfaction in seeing. When I finished packing, I walked past him again without making eye contact. I made it all the way to the front door before he spoke again. I do love you, Maggie. That was never a lie. I turned to look at him one last time. The man I'd built my entire adult life around. The man I'd trusted completely. The stranger who'd been wearing my husband's face for 30 years. You don't get to say that to me right now, I told him. You don't get to claim love while hiding something this fundamental. Love doesn't look like what you've done to me. I walked out of the house we'd shared for nearly 3 decades and drove away without looking back. Daniel's guest room smelled like lavender and old books. I sat on the edge of the bed that first night, staring at the wall, unable to cry even though I wanted to. My brother had asked very few questions when I'd shown up at his Seattle apartment at 9 in the evening, just taken one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug that nearly broke whatever composure I had left. His wife Jennifer made tea I didn't drink and offered food I couldn't eat. They set me up in their spare room and promised we'd talk in the morning when I was ready. I was grateful for their discretion, for not pushing, for giving me space to simply exist in my shattered state. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photographs. Emma as a child, Emma as a teenager, Emma as a grown woman. Thomas's daughter. The child he'd chosen to keep secret from me for 30 years. Around 3 in the morning, I finally gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen. Daniel was there, sitting at the table with his own cup of tea, as if he'd been waiting for me. Couldn't sleep either, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I sat down and finally the story came pouring out. Everything I'd found in the attic, the photographs, the letters, the financial records, the video calls. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each new detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. I knew there was something off about Thomas. Not this specifically, but something. The way he was always so controlled, so careful about everything. Nobody's that careful unless they're hiding something. Why didn't you ever say anything? Would you have believed me? He looked at me with sad understanding. You loved him, Maggie. You built your whole life around that marriage. If I'd come to you with vague suspicions and no proof, you would have defended him. You would have had to. He was right and we both knew it. What are you going to do now? Daniel asked. I have no idea. The admission felt like failure. I don't even know where to start. Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. You start by taking care of yourself. You give yourself time to process this. You don't make any big decisions while you're in shock. And when you're ready, you figure out what kind of life you want to build from here. Over the next few days, I existed in a strange fog. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did. I let Jennifer mother me, accepting the meals she prepared and the quiet company she offered. Daniel gave me space but checked on me regularly, making sure I was eating, sleeping, functioning at a basic level. Thomas called my cell phone repeatedly. I didn't answer. He left voicemails that I deleted without listening to. He sent text messages that I couldn't bring myself to read. I wasn't ready to hear his explanations or justifications. I needed time to sit with my own feelings first. On the 4th day, Jennifer knocked on my door mid-morning. There's someone here to see you, she said gently. A young woman. She says her name is Emma. My heart stopped. Emma. Thomas's daughter. Here. I don't know if I can, I started, but Jennifer interrupted. She seems nice, Maggie. And she says she needs to talk to you. That it's important. But I'll send her away if you want. You don't owe her anything. I thought about it for a long moment. Then I said no, I'll see her. Emma was sitting in Daniel's living room when I came out, perched on the edge of the couch like a bird ready to take flight. In person, she was even more clearly Thomas's daughter. The same eyes, the same facial structure, even some of his mannerisms in the way she held herself. She stood when she saw me, and I could see she was nervous. Mrs. Bennet, she said, then corrected herself. Maggie, I'm sorry to just show up like this. Dad told me what happened. That you found out about me. I needed to see you. Why? The question came out harsher than I'd intended. Emma flinched but held her ground. Because you deserve to hear my side of this. Because I'm not trying to excuse what Dad did, but I think there are things you should know. Things he won't tell you because he's trying to protect me. I gestured to the couch. Sit. She did, and I took the chair across from her. Daniel and Jennifer had tactfully disappeared, giving us privacy. Emma took a deep breath. I didn't know about you until I was 12 years old. Up until then, I thought Dad was just a single guy who visited on weekends. Mom told me he traveled for work, that his schedule was complicated, and I accepted that because I was a kid and that's what kids do. She twisted her hands together in her lap. Then one day I overheard Mom on the phone with him. She was angry, telling him he needed to figure out his situation, that it wasn't fair to keep lying to his wife. That's when I learned you existed. That Dad wasn't single, that he'd been married the entire time he'd been part of my life. How did that make you feel? I asked, genuinely curious. Confused. Hurt. Angry at both of them. Emma's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I confronted Mom, and she told me the whole story. How she and Dad had dated, how she got pregnant, how he was already involved with you by then. She said she'd given him a choice, me or you, and he'd chosen you. But then he'd come back, begged to be part of my life anyway, promised he'd support us financially and be there however he could. And she agreed to that? She didn't want me to grow up without a father. Emma's voice was soft. Her own dad had abandoned her when she was little, and she didn't want that for me. So she made a deal with him. He could be in my life, but only on her terms. Regular visits, financial support, and absolute secrecy from you. Why the secrecy? I leaned forward. Why not just tell me the truth from the beginning? Emma met my eyes. Because Mom made him promise. She said if he told you about me, she'd cut him off completely. She didn't want to be the other woman, didn't want me to be the secret child that broke up your marriage. She thought it was kinder this way, letting you live your life not knowing, not having to deal with the pain of his betrayal. That wasn't her decision to make, I said, anger rising in my chest. It wasn't her right to decide what I could or couldn't handle. I know. Emma nodded. And I'm not defending it. I'm just telling you what happened. After Mom died, I wanted Dad to tell you. We had huge fights about it. But by then, it had been going on for so long that he didn't know how. He was terrified of losing you. So he chose to keep lying. Yes. Emma looked down at her hands. And I let him. Which makes me complicit in this too. I could have reached out to you myself. I could have ended it years ago. But I was selfish. I didn't want to lose my relationship with my dad, and I was afraid that if the truth came out, you'd make him choose between us. Would I have? I wasn't sure anymore. Would I have demanded Thomas cut his daughter out of his life? Could I have been that cruel? Emma pulled something from her purse, a manila envelope. I brought you something. Letters Mom wrote but never sent. She kept them in a box I found after she died. I think she wanted you to know the truth eventually, but she never got the courage. I took the envelope but didn't open it. Why are you really here, Emma? Because I need you to know that Dad loves you. She said it with such conviction that I almost believed her. He talks about you constantly. How smart you are, how strong, how you've built this incredible career. He's so proud of you. Even though he knows he doesn't deserve to be. He has a funny way of showing love. I know. Emma's voice broke. And I'm not asking you to forgive him or take him back or anything like that. I just wanted you to understand that this situation, it's complicated. There are no good guys here, no simple villains. Just people who made mistakes and then kept making them because they didn't know how to stop. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I asked the question that had been eating at me since I'd seen those first photographs. Did he ever wish I was you? Did he ever look at me and think about the daughter he couldn't claim publicly? Emma's eyes widened. No. God, no. Maggie, you and I, we're completely different parts of his life. He doesn't compare us. He loves us differently. But he chose you, I said quietly. Every Saturday for 30 years, he chose you. Emma shook her head. He chose both of us. That's the problem. He wanted everything, and in trying to have it all, he hurt everyone. She stood to leave, and I walked her to the door. Before she left, She turned back to me. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you got caught up in our mess. You didn't deserve any of this. After she left, I sat with Sarah's letters for a long time before opening the envelope. There were 5 of them, each dated from different years. Each one Sarah had apparently written to me, but never had the courage to send. The first was from 1976, shortly after Thomas and I married. Dear Margaret, it began. You don't know me, but I know you. Or at least I know of you. Thomas talks about you sometimes when he visits Emma. He says you're kind and smart and that he loves you. I want to hate you, but I can't. You're not the villain in this story. If anyone is, it's me and Thomas, 2 people who made selfish choices and are now trying to live with the consequences. The letters continued chronologically, documenting Sarah's struggle with the arrangement she'd agreed to. She wrote about watching Emma ask why her daddy didn't live with them, about the guilt of maintaining such a massive deception, about her growing resentment of Thomas even as she remained grateful for his financial support and presence in Emma's life. The final letter, written shortly before her death in 1998, was the hardest to read. Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and Emma found these letters and decided you should see them. I hope she made the right choice. I spent 20 years keeping Thomas's secret, protecting his marriage to you while raising his daughter. I told myself it was the honorable thing, that I was preventing pain and preserving your happiness. But the truth is I was a coward. I should have told you years ago. You deserved to know. You deserved the choice I took from you. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of it. Sarah. I folded the letters carefully and put them back in the envelope. Then I finally allowed myself to cry, not for my marriage or for Thomas, but for Sarah. A woman I'd never met who'd carried the weight of this secret until it killed her. A woman who'd made impossible choices in an impossible situation and spent her life second-guessing them. Daniel found me an hour later, still sitting on the couch with tears running down my face. You okay? He asked, sitting beside me. No. I wiped my eyes. But I will be. Eventually. What do you need right now? I need to talk to Thomas. I need to hear him explain all of this in his own words. And then I need to decide what comes next. Daniel drove me back to Portland the next morning. We didn't talk much during the 2-hour drive. There wasn't much left to say. When we pulled up in front of the house I'd shared with Thomas for 29 years, it looked different somehow. Smaller. Less like a home and more like a building where I'd happened to store my things. Thomas's car was in the driveway. He was home, probably waiting for me. You want me to come in with you? Daniel asked. No. This is something I need to do alone. I'll be at a coffee shop 2 blocks over. Call me when you're ready to leave. I let myself in through the front door. Thomas was in the living room, sitting on the couch where we'd watched countless movies and television shows over the years. He stood when he saw me, his face a mixture of hope and fear. Maggie. We need to talk. I stayed standing, keeping distance between us. And this time, I want the whole truth. No more lies, no more omissions. Everything. He nodded and sat back down. I remained standing, needing the psychological advantage of height. Tell me about Sarah, I said. From the beginning. Thomas took a deep breath and began to speak. Thomas looked older than I'd ever seen him. The lines around his eyes had deepened, his shoulders slumped forward, and his hands shook slightly as he clasped them together. He took a long breath before speaking. I met Sarah in 1972, he began. I was working my first engineering job, and she was a secretary in the same building. We dated for about 8 months. It was intense, passionate, everything you'd expect from a relationship in your early 20s. But we fought constantly. We wanted different things from life. I was focused on my career. She wanted to settle down immediately. We broke up in early 1973. And then you met me, I said. Yes. You were different from Sarah. Calmer, more patient. Being with you felt easy in a way that being with Sarah never had. I fell in love with you quickly. But you went back to Sarah. Thomas rubbed his face with both hands. She called me 6 months after we'd started dating. Said she needed to see me, that it was important. When I met her, she told me she was pregnant. The baby was mine, conceived right before we broke up. What did you do? I panicked. He looked at me directly for the first time. I was 23 years old, Maggie. I was terrified. Sarah wanted to keep the baby, but she didn't want to get back together. She said she'd raise the child alone, but she thought I deserved to know I was going to be a father. You could have told me then. I should have. Thomas's voice was heavy with regret. But I convinced myself it would be cruel to burden you with my mess. Sarah didn't want anything from me except maybe occasional financial help. I thought I could handle it quietly, send her money when I could, and build a life with you without the two worlds ever touching. But they did touch. They touched every single Saturday for 30 years. After Emma was born, everything changed. Thomas leaned back against the couch, his eyes distant. Sarah sent me a photo of her, this tiny perfect thing with my eyes, and I felt something I'd never felt before. I couldn't just send money and walk away. I needed to know my daughter. So you started the attic ritual. Not at first. Initially I'd drive to Seattle once a month, tell you I had work obligations. But the lies were getting harder to maintain, and Sarah was uncomfortable with the deception. She gave me an ultimatum. Either tell you the truth and we'd figure out some kind of shared custody arrangement, or keep you in the dark but limit my involvement to scheduled visits only. And you chose the lies. I chose both of you. His voice broke. I know how that sounds, how selfish it is. But I loved you, Maggie. I loved our life together. And I loved Emma. I couldn't imagine giving up either one. So you built the attic, I said. Created your secret space. The attic was my compromise with Sarah. She didn't want me bringing Emma to Portland, didn't want any chance of you discovering her accidentally. But she agreed to let me document Emma's life, to have regular video calls once the technology existed. The photographs, the albums, the Saturday sessions, that was my way of being a father when I couldn't be there in person. All those years, I whispered. All those years I thought you were building model ships. I know. Thomas stood up, paced to the window. I know how absurd that sounds now. But at the time, it seemed like the only way. I told myself I was protecting you from pain, that what you didn't know couldn't hurt you. Except it did hurt me. I felt my anger rising again. Every month I cried over negative pregnancy tests. You already had a child. When I went through fertility treatments, when I grieved that we'd never be parents, you were video chatting with your daughter. How could you watch me suffer like that and say nothing? Because I'm a coward. He turned to face me, tears streaming down his face. Because telling you would have meant losing everything. You would have left me, and rightfully so. Sarah would have been furious that I'd revealed the secret. I would have destroyed both relationships. So I kept lying year after year, telling myself it was for everyone's good when really it was just to protect myself. Did you ever think about what would happen when I found out? Because surely you knew I'd find out eventually. Honestly? Thomas wiped his eyes. I thought I'd die first. I thought I'd take the secret to my grave, and you'd never have to know. When Sarah got sick, I was terrified she'd tell you out of spite or guilt. But she kept the secret even at the end. She protected me when I didn't deserve it. We stood in silence, the weight of 30 years of deception filling the space between us. I had so many more questions, but I was exhausted. Emotionally drained in a way I'd never experienced. I need you to understand something, Thomas said quietly. Everything else in our marriage was real. My love for you, the life we built, the partnership we had. That wasn't a lie. You weren't just a cover story for my other family. You were my wife, my partner, the person I chose to build a life with. But you also chose Emma, I said. Every week, for 3 hours, you chose her. I chose both of you. He looked at me with such desperation. I know that's not good enough. I know I should have made a clean choice one way or another. But I couldn't. I was too weak, too selfish. What do you want from me now, Thomas? What outcome are you hoping for here? He was quiet for a long moment. I want you to forgive me, but I know I don't deserve that. I want to explain that I did it all out of love, but I know that's not an excuse. Mostly, he said softly, I want you to know that losing you is the consequence I feared most for 30 years. And now that it's here, I realize nothing was worth this price. I sat down in the chair across from him, suddenly too tired to stand. I met Emma, I said. His eyes widened. She came to see you? In Seattle. She brought me letters from Sarah. I pulled the envelope from my purse and set it on the coffee table between us. Letters Sarah wrote to me but never sent. She wanted me to know the truth, Thomas. Even she, who had everything to lose by telling me, knew I deserved better than this. Thomas picked up the envelope with shaking hands, but didn't open it. What did Emma say? That it's complicated. That there are no villains here. That you love me. I watched his face carefully. She defended you, which is more than you deserve. Emma's a better person than I am, he said. She always has been. The silence stretched between us again. Finally, I said what I'd been thinking since Emma's visit. I can't do this anymore, Thomas. I can't be married to you knowing what I know now. The foundation of our entire relationship was built on lies, and I don't think there's any way to repair that. He nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting this. I understand. I'll file for divorce. I kept my voice steady, businesslike. I'll be fair about the division of assets. I'm not interested in punishing you financially. I just want to be free of this. What will you do? Where will you go? I don't know yet. For the first time, I felt a tiny spark of something that might have been hope. But I have time to figure it out. For the first time in 30 years, I have time to figure out who I am without you. I stood to leave, but Thomas stopped me with a question. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? I considered it honestly. Maybe someday, I said. But not now. Not soon. What you did, Thomas, it wasn't just the affair or the secret daughter. You stole my choices from me. You decided what I could handle, what I should know, what kind of life I'd live. You took away my agency for 3 decades. That's not something I can forgive quickly. I'm sorry, he whispered. For all of it. I'm so sorry. I know you are. I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. But sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't give me back the years I lost. Sorry doesn't change the fact that I built my entire adult life around a man who was fundamentally dishonest with me. At the door, I turned back one last time. I hope you and Emma have a good relationship going forward. She seems like a wonderful person, and she deserves a father who's honest with her. Maybe now that the secret's out, you can be that for her. The divorce took 6 months to finalize. Thomas didn't contest anything. He moved out of our house within a week of our final conversation, taking only his personal belongings and leaving everything else for me to sort through. I found a good therapist, a woman in her 60s who'd seen it all and didn't judge. I spent months unpacking my feelings, my anger, my grief, my sense of betrayal. She helped me see that I wasn't stupid for trusting Thomas, that his deception said everything about his character and nothing about mine. I sold the house. I couldn't live there anymore, not with the attic looming above me like a monument to everything I'd been blind to. I bought a small cottage on the outskirts of Portland, a place with no history, no ghosts, no locked doors hiding secrets. Emma reached out a few times in those early months. We met for coffee occasionally, awkward conversations where we tried to figure out what relationship, if any, we could have. She wasn't responsible for her father's choices, and I didn't want to punish her for his sins. Slowly, carefully, we built something resembling a friendship. Through Emma, I learned that Thomas had moved to Seattle to be closer to her. He'd taken early retirement, living on his pension and the money from his half of our house sale. He was trying to be a better father, Emma said. Trying to make up for lost time. I was glad for Emma's sake. She deserved a present father. But I felt nothing for Thomas anymore, not anger, not love, not even regret. He'd become a stranger to me, someone I'd once known but no longer recognized. My colleagues at the law firm were supportive through the divorce. They didn't pry, didn't gossip, just offered quiet encouragement and flexible hours when I needed them. I threw myself into work, taking on new responsibilities, mentoring younger staff members, finding purpose in professional achievement. I dated occasionally, nothing serious. Men my age, mostly divorced or widowed, looking for companionship without drama. I wasn't ready for anything more, wasn't sure I ever would be. The idea of trusting someone that deeply again seemed impossible. But I was learning to trust myself. Learning to make decisions based on what I wanted rather than what someone else needed from me. Learning that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely. 2 years after the divorce, I took a trip to Ireland, something I'd always wanted to do but Thomas had never been interested in. I spent 3 weeks exploring ancient castles, walking coastal cliffs, drinking whiskey in pubs with locals who told stories older than any lies. On my last night in Dublin, sitting in a small pub near my hotel, a woman about my age struck up a conversation. Her name was Catherine, and she was also traveling alone, also recently divorced. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, about the freedom and terror of starting over in middle age, about the unexpected gift of discovering yourself after decades of being someone's wife. We're like phoenixes, Catherine said, raising her glass, burned to ash and rising again. I clinked my glass against hers. To rising again. When I returned to Portland, something had shifted. The anger I'd carried for 2 years had transformed into something lighter, clearer. I was grateful, I realized. Grateful that I'd discovered the truth, even though it had destroyed my marriage. Grateful for the chance to build a life based on honesty rather than comfortable lies. I began volunteering at a women's shelter, helping other women navigate the complexities of leaving relationships built on deception or abuse. I shared my story when it seemed helpful, offering proof that life could continue, even thrive after betrayal. 5 years after finding that attic, I stood in my cottage garden on a bright Saturday afternoon, planting roses. My phone rang, Emma's name on the screen. We talked every few weeks now. Our relationship settled into something comfortable and genuine. She told me about her work, her travels, her life. I told her about mine. We didn't discuss Thomas much, though she sometimes mentioned him in passing. That day, she called to tell me he'd been diagnosed with early-onset dementia. The doctors said he had maybe 5 years before it became severe. How do you feel about that? She asked gently. I'm sorry for him, I said honestly. And I'm sorry for you, that you'll lose him this way. But I don't feel what I might have felt if things were different. I don't feel like I'm losing my husband, because that man was never who I thought he was. Would you want to see him? Emma asked. Before it gets bad. Maybe for closure. I thought about it, really considered it. Then I said no. I got my closure 5 years ago when I walked out of that house. I don't need anything more from him. After we hung up, I went back to my roses. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, and somewhere a bird was singing. I was 56 years old, divorced, childless, living alone in a cottage I'd bought with money from selling a house full of lies. And I was happy. Not the complicated, compromised happiness I'd had with Thomas, but something simpler and truer. The happiness of knowing myself, of living authentically, of building a life on foundations that were solid because I'd laid them myself. The attic and its secrets belonged to the past. I'd discovered what was hidden there, faced the truth no matter how painful, and survived. More than survived, I'd learned to thrive. That's what I wanted to share with you today, my dear ones. The story of how I discovered my husband's 30-year deception, how it destroyed my marriage, and how I built something better from the ashes. It wasn't easy. There were days I didn't think I'd make it through. But I did, and so can anyone facing similar betrayals. You are stronger than you think. You deserve honesty, respect, and love that doesn't require you to remain ignorant. And when life burns everything down, you have the power to rise again. Different than before, but somehow more yourself than you ever were. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it brings comfort to someone who needs it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.